The boy who visited his grandfather every couple of months, Max, was now sitting and staring alternately at the ceiling and the curtains. Out of boredom, he was searching for faces in the curtains. One of them resembled a girl, another Caesar, and the third a lizard. Max himself didn't know why he was doing this. He could have gotten up and done something more productive than feigning sleep like a little child at 16. However, there was nothing else he could do here. Neither his laptop nor his phone were working properly, and the connection was so poor that even simple internet requests took a couple of minutes. He got out of bed and slowly walked to the window. It offered a beautiful view of aging houses sunken in the ground, their glass covered in a dark haze. One of them was right across from his grandfather's house, a shack, more likely a center of trash and jokes if there had been children there. But in reality, it was a simple, rusty iron door, a gate that had come apart, a poorly installed fence, dirt smeared right on the walls of this little house, a window with a small curtain that didn't hide the fact that everything inside was broken, and a lock on the door. Maxime, his mood suddenly changed, got dressed, taking with him a couple of books he was supposed to be reading this spring, and running down from the second floor to the first, he threw his feet into his boots and, running out of the property, easily opened the door inside the gate. Such a short walk, and he was standing in front of this very shack. There was nothing in it, only a lock that had been installed long ago, for who knows who. There had never been thieves in these parts, so Maxim couldn't answer that question. So what the hell is it here for? He thought, but he was immediately saying it out loud. They left the house like a dump, by God. There was a lot of that here. The house next door was literally identical. The only difference was that the paint was still peeling off its walls. However, the owners couldn't sell the property, and the house was slated for demolition. They clearly weren't strong enough to destroy what their distant ancestor had built. Or maybe there was no buyer, and this seemingly grown-up guy, nicely dressed, not even leaving a stinking trail behind him, still wanted to know, like a little kid, what was behind the walls of this wreck. Luckily for his prank, the window was broken. He could easily climb in. There was, of course, the risk of getting scratched, and the thought of going to help his family was nagging at him. Maybe even write to some Eve, Evelina? Although names, even for someone who's had enough of Western pop, are too exotic for Russia. More likely, he'd ask Katya out. He didn't know much about her, but he liked her face. Unlike the other girls in his class, she wore black lipstick and was generally aloof. For some reason, this attracted him. She also had blue, slightly dark eyes. Only now did he realize he'd seen a face similar to hers in the patterns on the curtains. Shaking his head, he snapped out of these thoughts. Without a second's hesitation, while no one was watching, he entered this junk house. The inside was no better than the outside. There was little space. The appliances weren't working. The wallpaper was peeling, and the floors were filthy, so dirty that he even considered taking off his shoes and walking around in socks. Otherwise, it would be obvious Maxim had been rummaging through the trash. He walked from the living room into the hallway. There was an icon there, looking straight at him. Unlike everything else here, it was clean, even crystal clear. After a moment, crossing himself, Maxim walked into the room across the hall. It looked like a bedroom, except the bed was completely soiled. The pillow was seriously lacking in fluff, and there were footprints on the floor, also very dirty and as if from bare feet. There was also a closet. In it lay old photographs and a wallet with money. He hadn't taken them, of course. He had been trained and brought up, as Maxim himself believed, correctly, and it didn't matter that this same upbringing had allowed him to trespass on someone else's territory. How ironic. Suddenly he was distracted. Instead of examining the old things, he looked at the floor, and all because of a small, even quiet whisper beneath the floor. It resembled a cradle, calling him to itself. For a second, Maxim imagined that same Katya, humming that low-pitched melody. He grinned, turning and moving into the third and final room. It was a nursery, albeit completely dismantled. But what struck Maxim most of all, the glass lay right on the floor, uncleaned, already heavily dusted. He suddenly wanted to get out of there, especially when that whisper repeated itself. It was uttering some words that barely reached Maxim. He hurried, crunching glass and creaking the floor. Suddenly, the conversation stopped. Footsteps were heard right next to where Maxim was. With quiet dashes, he almost reached the window through which he climbed. The hatch to the basement opened. He heard it and hid behind the table in the living room. Someone was crawling across the floor, making disgusting sounds. Blop, 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 came the sound nearby. Maxim didn't know why he continued hiding or didn't run away. Rather, he feared not so much what was happening as the responsibility he would have to shoulder before the owner of the house, who had decided to play a prank on the boy. Maxim peeked out from behind the table and saw a hand that resembled a bony five-pronged fork. It was right where the exit from this house was. Unsure of what to do, Maxim decided to carefully crawl to the front door. His great disappointment was that even when he tried to pull the door, it wouldn't open, even with the keys lying on the nightstand. He'd immediately noticed the lock on the door. It was firmly there, impossible to budge. He heard squelches, bloops, and the creaking of the floor, prompting him to run into the basement, closing it with a large hatch. A flashlight, similar to the kind miners carried, lay nearby. He put it on his head and turned it on. It turned out there was a key on the floor, most likely the one for the hatch in the basement. Maxim quickly turned it, just as a blow came through the hatch. Now, not only a hand, but also an eye was visible through the crack. It peered out, trying to catch the guy's eye, but clearly couldn't, and its eye was dark blue. Maxim frantically tried to turn off the light, as if that would help him hide. Although even a blind man could see that there was an intruder in the house. In a strange house. This caused him to fall, hitting his head on the step and nearly breaking the flashlight before losing consciousness. Maxim would have been glad to wake up at home and look at the curtains again, but instead he found himself in the depths of dark corridors. He took the flashlight and shone it above where the hatch had been, revealing only a black wall. He shone the light on the rest of the space, the same picture, only a long way ahead. And Maxim set off. Occasionally, strange faces would emerge from the glare and shadows cast by the flashlight. They resembled faces he'd seen before: classmates, friends, passers-by, homeless people. Many had distorted expressions of terror, especially the female classmates, with their mascara completely smeared across their faces, visible in black and white, hands pressed to their noses, eyes glaring with panic. The pale face of his best friend, lifeless, stared at him with an open mouth, jaw dislocated. They disappeared as he shone the light, but as soon as he moved the beam away from one wall, the face seemed to regain its full form. Its outline merged with the darkness and turned into a chuckle, its mouth gaping to an unimaginable size. Walking through these corridors, he cursed himself for ever entering this damned house, and he could barely restrain himself from screaming or running wildly along the walls. The beams of the flashlight picked out faces, even those he'd seen on the curtain. That snake, the slain Caesar, and the Virgin disappeared from view almost immediately, only to reappear just as abruptly. Maxim recalled the good times in his life more out of desperation than fear. There had been kindergarten, school, holidays with family, parties with friends. He'd had fun then. It had seemed like a blessing, hanging out with people you'd known your whole life. Now he realized how stupid it all was, and what a waste of time it had been, especially now when all he had was the flashlight and those faces. In anger, the boy punched the wall and felt it almost swallow his hand whole. She tugged and tugged like quicksand, but he managed to yank it free and curse all those creatures. His anger almost completely obscured his fear. Gradually, the lantern began to flicker. The light dissipated, revealing hideous faces and curtains. Curtains. Maxim noticed a rag hung on one wall, shreds of leather, stitched together into a single mess. Grabbing them, he tore them out by the roots, but there really was a passage in the wall. It went higher, much higher, like a staircase to the upper floors. Now Maxim had to decide where to go, forward or somewhere new. But unfortunately, the lantern reminded him that it wouldn't last forever, and so Maxim jumped into this passage with the ladder. Unlike the previous corridor, it was quiet here. Nothing odd, except the fact that everything around was dark. He laughed, knowing no one could reach him now. With incredible zeal, he ran forward. Even when he was drenched in sweat, Maxim didn't stop for a second. His head began to pound. The flashlight would malfunction or even shut off completely. But even in complete darkness, he carefully placed his feet, landing on each step higher. However, something pushed him into the very depths of emptiness. For a second, he even seemed to catch a glimpse of the gigantic dark lips that had once attracted him, but now only frightened him. Maxim landed on the ground, now seeing not a staircase, but a vast descent downward. Hands, mouths, and teeth began to emerge from the walls and floor. Max jumped, realizing it was the only way out. But as he fell and slid, They began touching his fingers, licking them with their tongues and sniffing them with their nostrils. He had to pry them off, tear them with his teeth, and kick them back. All the while, only anger remained on his face. In fact, it was this anger that drove him forward, to smash the eyes of all these creatures right into the cerebral cortex, to kill them. There was also the fear that when he went out to his family, they would kill him. He wanted to dodge, to leave, to avoid the responsibility of trespassing on private property. And now, he didn't care about his upbringing. He screamed into these creatures' throats, tore out their tongues and cursed them, while a storm of emotions raged in his heart, translatable only to his tongue. "You're a beast, neighbor. You're a nit. You're a nit. All of you. What do you want, you monster? Bite me. Come here, you bastard." He tore their faces and everything else he could, almost playfully. Eyes, kidneys, hands, fingers, even lips. He himself didn't know where this anger came from, where he got such strength, and where did he get the right to kill? Suddenly, the descent ended. He fell onto the floor, soiled by his feet. There were tables like boxes. A barely visible light with a bluish tint shone from above, casting rare reflections on the floor. Glass was scattered everywhere, large, even enormous, sharp pieces. Maxim, now calmed by the deaths of the freaks and bastards, boldly walked over these dangerous shards. He didn't care that they wounded him, leaving bloody marks on the dusty blocks. He didn't care that he was tearing up the boots he'd been so reluctant to get dirty in the first place. And he didn't care that a man's corpse lay right in the middle of the room. He was bald, thin, eyeless, completely naked, with one side of his torso torn off and lying on a piece of glass. Maxim touched the man's face and felt only cold. That's when it hit him. He felt pain in his legs, arms, fingers, someone else's blood. And the feelings he'd had seemed to change to what he'd feel if he'd been killing people. Not ugly grimaces. Maxim recoiled from the man, who tore himself free from the shards, and rising, began crawling across the floor, wheezing and making disgusting sounds. Without thinking twice, Max ran away, dropping his headlamp, narrowly avoiding landing on the glass and slicing his face open. He quickly regained his balance and leapt into the hallway. Hundreds of icons stared at him. At the end of the hallway was a small door, and a Jewish-looking face hung from the ceiling. A long nose, a gaping mouth with a protruding tongue, and eyes that seemed to see, yet monochromatic, as if they'd been painted over. The lighting was exactly the same, dark blue, occasionally shimmering with bluish-white tones. Maxim approached and crossed himself, causing most of the portraits of the Virgin Mary to vanish. Behind him, he could already hear his neighbor's thump, causing the boy to rush to the door without thinking and start pushing, kicking, and tugging at it. But it wouldn't budge. It felt as if there were 100 locks there, holding this rusty piece of iron in place. After all, no matter how hard Maxim tried, it wouldn't open. When the neighbor's stabbing voice came close enough, Maxim leapt over it without looking. The corpse, its guts spilling, only howled, slowly turning around and rising on both hands. Max saw a passage appear to the right. It was a living room, but with a very high window. Dirt was everywhere, and faces were popping out of thin air, forcing the boy to jump over them, dodge them, or fly into the wall. That was the last one. He landed and hit the wall, from which teeth immediately emerged and pierced Maxim. The lighting suddenly turned dark, as if the lights had been turned off everywhere. Only the white teeth of those faces appeared and disappeared from the curtains. Barely standing with broken ribs and a bruised stomach, he crawled to the window. There was a chair there, just large enough to stand on and jump out. For a second, it seemed as if the heads of his parents appeared. His mom, dad, the grandfather he had been visiting, grandmothers, and even great-grandfathers, long dead and known only from photographs, were all around him. Now his great-grandfather resembled a skeleton, with one half of his face intact and the other half eaten away by worms. All these relatives were pulling him back with their tongues, right toward the wall he'd crashed into. The neighbor wasn't asleep either, literally walking on his hands, his organs fluttering in his broken body, sometimes even falling out. Maxim struggled to fight them off, tearing at his taste buds and gouging out his relative's eyes as best he could. The neighbor, running up, smashed himself into the wall. People gasped, screamed, and whispered, but the young man, completely mangled and bruised, climbed onto a chair and rolling, cutting himself on shards of glass from a broken window, fell out onto the ground. He came to in a chair, right next to the house he'd climbed into. Glancing at his watch, it was exactly 2 o'clock, not much later than when he'd gotten there. Maxim quickly left the neighbor's property, closed the gate, and went to his grandfather's to help with some chores and take his mind off things. A slight tremor racked his body, making it difficult to saw properly. When they'd finished helping, and they'd built a basketball hoop together and gone to lunch, he realized he'd found the keys to the basement in his pocket, dirty and unpolished, the only reminder that all this had actually happened. "Grandfather, who lives in that house?" Maxim asked, pointing to the shack. "Yeah, right, Dima, our neighbor." "Does he live there?" "Yeah, he does. He comes over just to have a look, stay a while, and then goes back to town." "Why is it so bad there?" "Look, there's even dirt on the house, on the walls, a broken window. He doesn't do any repairs, just comes and goes. Look, he was there yesterday." "What does he need this house for?" "Who the hell knows? Apparently my dad built it, but Dima doesn't care. He let it go. That's why the house is in this state." "And what about Dima himself?" "How is he?" "He's in bad shape. Drinker or not, I don't know. But he looks pretty bad. Not great, to put it mildly. Disheveled, a bit overweight, wearing a dirty t-shirt, bald." "Okay," the grandson replied understandingly. He still felt a slight shaking, as if he was still there, with those faces. When the holidays came to an end, the boy noticed that the window wasn't broken. It was boarded up. Then Maxim told his grandfather they'd forgotten something. He quickly ran home, picked up the very same keys to Dima's basement, and threw them through the iron door. After that, they left. Nightmares tormented the boy for a long time, and the wounds he had sustained there manifested themselves even in his dreams. In real life, everything was easier, except that his classmates' lips now seemed ugly to him, and it became harder to imagine her at night without gagging. But one question still remained for him. Who had crawled out of the basement? Maxime didn't want to know the truth, and so he began visiting his grandfather even less often, justifying it by saying that the place had a negative influence on him. Then, as he learned, Dima had torn down the house and moved to distant lands. Then came holidays, birthdays. All this forced Max, now a student, to come and congratulate his family. This time, he went alone, by bus. Having arrived and walked a couple 100 meters, he saw that there was no entrance to the basement where the house had been. There was nothing there at all. He spat on the spot, crossing himself for the third time, and forever leaving the questions unanswered. Who was that blopping man if, according to his grandfather, the neighbor was an ordinary man? And was there really a basement? And the faces of the people inhabiting it